May I just point out one thing and I'd love to get your comments on this because Elaine Pagels was instrumental in my observation on origins of Satan, how much on the spiritual realm, an alternative realm, that there were, celestial battles and wars between principalities and rulers. We see it in Paul. And how they actually, while they're speaking in this language, like you're describing a prince, an angel of Greece, or these spiritual beings, these godly beings, immortal beings are fighting, there is a reflection often that humans are also doing that. So I guess my question is saying, while it is talking about what you're saying, is it also possibly reflecting what's going on between the Maccabees and Antiochus in your view?
Well, let's see what he says first.
Okay.
The wise among the people should give understanding to many. For some days, however, they shall fall by sword and flame and suffer captivity and plunder. When they fall victim, they shall receive little help. NRSV says a little help. I would prefer to just say little help, which is to say not much. Now, St. Jerome, who translated the Bible into Latin, said that this was a slighting reference to the Maccabees. And that's been a very influential opinion. Whether it's right, I'm not sure. Some of the wise shall fall, so that they may be refined, purified, and cleansed until the time of the end, for there is still an interval until the time appointed. Now, it doesn't say anything about they will eventually drive out the Greeks. It doesn't say anything about the wise winning a battle. They will fall by sword, captivity, and plunder. But the main concern for them seems to be that they teach, they impart understanding, and that they are purified. Now, there's another text that many people think was written about the same time called the Assumption of Moses. And that tells a story of a persecution that's very much like this. And there the father takes his sons to go into a field and say, let us purify for ourselves for 3 days and die. For if we do this, our blood will be avenged before the Lord. Now, there's a story in First Maccabees about some people in the time of trouble who fled to the wilderness, and the soldiers surrounded them on the Sabbath. And these were pietists, and they wouldn't fight on the Sabbath. So they were all killed. And the Maccabees said, to hell with that.
Right.
It's all right to break one commandment if you can then be alive to keep the rest of them. So I figure Daniel was on the side of the people in the cave, or was more like the people in the cave. But really, to circle back now, though, to your question of how do we know that Daniel was wrong, got some things wrong. Up to this point, you see, everything that has been supposedly prophesied happened. Then it says the king shall act as he pleases. He shall pay no respect to the gods of his ancestors, and so forth. And at the time of the end, in verse 40, the king of the south shall attack him. The king of Egypt did not attack the king of Syria after these things happened in Jerusalem. The king of the north shall crush him like a whirlwind with chariots and horsemen. He shall come into the beautiful land, and tens of thousands shall fall victim. Again, this did not happen. He sent soldiers to Jerusalem at one point, but this would have been a little bit earlier in the story. But the king didn't just invade Judea. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. But reports from the east and the north shall alarm him. He shall go out with great fury to bring ruin and complete destruction to many. And then you get to the crucial point. He shall pitch his palatial tents between the sea and the beautiful holy mountain, yet he shall come to his end with no one to help him. So it is predicting that the king of Syria, Antiochus IV, would invade Judea and die between the sea and the holy mountain. In fact, he died out in the east.
Beyond the Euphrates somewhere, probably.
In 164. Yeah.
Yeah. And the Holy Mountain, just so anyone has a geographic idea, this particular Holy Mountain, is this somewhere in the region of Judea in the north here near?
No, this is Mount Zion in Jerusalem.
Okay.
Now, that is how certainly any Jew would take it.
Got it.
The beautiful Holy Mountain is Mount Zion.
Even though there's several holy mountains described in the earlier tradition.
You go there now and you say, where's the mountain? But
yeah, I know what you mean. I just wanted to emphasize that because by this time, as Jonathan Adler and others have pointed out, you have a pretty confident, developed form, at least, of Judaism around this period that is happening. I'm not saying canon was, there was no fixed canon, but like
Yeah.
there is a formulation of sacred literature and religious practice that we would consider Judaism at this point, and being Jerusalem is the central heart of God's temple and such. So Antiochus dies where he shouldn't. Details that are described about him don't happen, though they continue that same predictive power with the same kind of, there's no shift in complete change, but it sounds like it's the same kind of thing that came before that was accurate. And then after that point, it just everything from that point on gets wrong.
Everything from that point on hasn't happened.
Got it.
And remember, back when I first wrote on this, there's a professor in Belfast who was a respected professor on the Septuagint, but was a fundamentalist, I think. And he wrote to me and said, well, obviously, these last 6 verses, that those are not about Antiochus Epiphanes. Those are about the Antichrist, who is yet to come.
Right.
And so why then do you suddenly jump from Antiochus Epiphanes to the Antichrist?
Of course, they have a different hermeneutic when you're dealing with the sacred.
Their hermeneutic would be, it can't be about Antiochus Epiphanes because that didn't happen.
Right.
And it's not, they just don't allow for a possibility that Daniel could have gotten some things wrong.
Exactly. This takes me, and I know we're dealing with different genre, different literature, different time. It's fast forwarding, 200 years practically, when the literature we call the Gospels pops up, and the Son of Man is harking back to Daniel, this language that we find in Judaism. And a lot of people read in the more conservative circles, and the groups I came out of called preterism. There are various forms of it. I'm not getting into all the interpretations, but to simply put, you wrote an article that you sent me before you published, and I hope you published it by now, but if not, people are getting a sneak peek, is on Mark. You were kind of tackling some of N.T. Wright's points. And Mark sounds to me, help me out with this, to be describing Roman soldiers surrounding Jerusalem, the idea of destruction that's coming to Jerusalem, and a lot of the details in there. He uses biblical language, meaning he uses Daniel type language, as any good Jew would do, oftentimes in a midrashic way, reapplying it to their context and such. But is there any clear signal in your view in Mark, Matthew, or Luke that the events being described predict things that don't come to pass? In a similar fashion, here are some, we know stuff, but we're predicting it. Remember, this is coming from Jesus's mouth in the 30s. Hint, hint, I'm writing this after the war. Similar to Daniel, anonymous author, we'll just say Mark, Matthew, and Luke, for the sake of brevity, predicting the war that you see is coming, and it's already happened technically. Is there any point in which you'd say, hey, this is where he's predicting something? These are signs of the end. They think because of this war that happened in 70, and then now we're dealing with failure. Is there anything in your view?
Yes, I'm just looking here at Mark 13. You can read along down, and a lot of it has happened. And if the Lord had not cut short those days, and no one would be saved. If anyone says to you at that time, look, here is the Messiah, or look, there he is, do not believe it. False messiahs and false prophets will appear and produce signs and omens and lead astray, if possible, the elect. But in those days, after that suffering, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light.
Right.
This can be also hyperbolic language.
Right.
But then they will see the Son of Man coming with great power and glory. He will send out the angels and gather his elect from the four winds of heaven, from the ends of the earth to the ends of heaven. If that has happened, Derek, we are among the left behind.
So technically, you can see how someone would try to make that hyperbolic, to try to make that symbolic or something, and not take that at face value.
That's what Tom Wright does.
Got it. Now, this gets into a more technical thing we don't have time to get into today, but I try to describe to someone that you have this kind of hyperbolic metaphorical language for resurrection in Ezekiel and other passages in scripture. However, by the time this literature is coming up, Jews are literally burying their dead in bone boxes, expecting an actual resurrection. There seems to be help me out.
Hold a minute here. The bone boxes have nothing to do with expecting resurrection. I think the bone box is long before that.
Okay. Help me out. Correct me.
The bone boxes, it was a way of being gathered to your ancestors.
Okay. I thought there was some significance to it.
Ideally, you were buried in the same tomb as your parents and your grandparents. And then, at some point, somebody tidies up and puts the bones in boxes. And that's just a way of, creating order. Now, if you believed in resurrection, I suppose, then you might relate it to that. But not all Jews did.
Got it.
But,
We know this.
but the belief in resurrection was certainly prior to the resurrection of Jesus.
Absolutely.
As Paul says, if there is no resurrection of the dead, then Christ has not been raised.
That's an odd thing to say. I'm a skeptic. I'm not persuaded. That's an odd thing to say. If you take my point of view, right, as I'm approaching this critically, and I'm thinking, why would he say that? He says he rose, but like he's maybe being rhetorical with the Corinthians and saying like, hey, look, if you don't buy this resurrection thing that we Jews have had, or maybe he's saying something to that effect.
You see, he's writing to the Corinthians, and he's writing to people who had great trouble with the idea of resurrection of the dead. Mind you, not unreasonably.
Right.
You know,
I can relate.
The evidence is not overwhelming, shall we say. You don't meet people walking around raised from the dead. So that's, I think, why Paul puts it that way. Now, and Daniel is the only book, I would say, in the Hebrew Bible who has a real resurrection. At that time, Michael, the great prince, protector of your people, shall arise. This tells you, where the real battle is being fought. In heaven. And at that time, your people shall be delivered, everyone who is found written in the book. That is also an innovation, because not all your people will be saved. Only those who are written in the book.
Right.
He's keeping a book. He's writing it twice. And he's putting in who's naughty and who's nice. And if you're not nice, you can sleep on. But many of those who sleep, and it's actually in the land of dust. It's usually translated in the dust of the earth, but it's in the land of dust. And I think that means Sheol, the netherworld, shall awake, some to everlasting life and some to shame and everlasting contempt. Daniel doesn't say that they will come back and get bodies back. Now, I think, what is raised must have some kind of body, but it's probably a transparent body. There are stories like this in the New Testament, where Jesus comes in through a locked door. So, it's the kind of body a ghost has. And then, those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the sky. They'll become like the stars. And others then go to shame and everlasting contempt. So that, in a way, is an early form of heaven and hell. As Daniel has it, I think it's experimental, that it's not fully worked out yet. Not everybody gets assigned either up or down, but the very good go up, the very bad go down. And there seems to be allowance that some people just may not rise at all.